What we're going to take a look at in this series is getting this character rig up. And this character is designed to help you learn the humanoid rigging process without being overwhelming. So the character is going to focus primarily on kinematic movements, arms, legs, torso, head. We're not going to get into facial constraints, but we'll also look at things like weapons and accessories and how we can go and attach those. If you'd like to follow along, you can come to the Vertmode website, navigate to the resources, and find our Gumroad page. It's probably a bit easier finding it here than searching. Or you can look down in the description, and you can find it down there. And you can go ahead and download the Junk Buddy practice character here. What you'll get with this is a folder that looks like this. It is going to be a Maya project folder. It will have some subfolders in here where you'll have the character, you'll have the geometry. This will include a FBX file here for those of you who might be interested in doing this in a different software package, as well as a Maya scene. I am noticing it says 3D object, so I may need to up that to be FBX. I thought I exported in FBX, but hey, it's Friday. I'm tired. So I might need to update that if you guys are catching this early. But let's go ahead and dive in and get started here and talk about where we're going to begin with this character. So when you approach rigging, you're going to want to think about two different rigging systems. We're going to have a system here where we have our skin rig, and we are going to have our control rig. And these are generally kept separate, and they're unified together through referencing. And the reason we do that is the skin rig might need to have adjustments in terms of the topology, in terms of the texture, in terms of the UV, and we don't necessarily want that to be tied to the controls. The other thing is if you're working in something like games, you can always reskin to a rig, so we could actually use a completely different geometry here, map it to our control rig, and what's important is this combined rig is what gets referenced in for animation. So in short, if you use this reference system, you could potentially have an infinite number of characters piping into a finite number of animations, and you can recycle things. So we're going to go ahead and practice this, and we'll go ahead and start with this corner here, kind of kicking things off with our skin rig. But in reality, you could start with either of these, and a lot of the times I actually do end up starting with the control rig instead of the skin rig, especially in a professional pipeline, because the model might not be done yet, which is another important factor. By separating these out, you can actually start on the rig without having the finished model. Now, the first step to this is going to be our joint placement. So what we're going to be doing specifically here is we're going to go ahead and place our joints, and we're going to orient our joints. All right. So let's go ahead and kind of review what a joint is. A joint basically represents a pivot, and it's going to connect to other joints, and a bone's basically going to run across. But really what we're looking at is that pivot aspect of it. So if we're taking a look at a basic character, and I'll just draw a little stick figure here, where we're going to see the joints is going to be areas that need to bend. So for example, we'd have a shoulder joint, and an elbow joint, and a wrist joint, and a hip joint, and a knee joint, and an ankle joint. So that's going to be where we're going to place these. The other thing we have to remember to do is to orient these. Now, there's another factor that is unique with characters where we also have to mirror. So if you've never worked on a character rig before, this is going to be a new element that we haven't really introduced before. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at this process. Step one is kind of figure out what you need to do in here and kind of clean things up and move things as needed. And most importantly, don't actually set up the joints in the geometry file. Remember, we want to be referencing the geometry into the joints, so we actually want to create a clean file. But before you dive in, look at what this file is. You'll see over here that we have a little hierarchy going. We have our character geo, our weapon geo, and these are going to be separated out. All right. If you're following along with this and you've downloaded the file, you're already going to have a Maya project folder. And just kind of as a side note, you're going to have a scenes file. And in here, you're going to have some subfolders for character. The character will be broken into geometry and into rig. So the geometry file is going to contain our geo that the modeler is working on, and our rig file is going to be the one that we work in. So to set this up, let's go ahead and come up here to File. We'll go ahead and just go into Reference Editor and hit our little plus icon. And we can go ahead and come into Characters, Geometry, and we can reference in our Junk Buddy _geo file and bring this in. And this will go ahead and give us the geometry. If you guys want to bring back the textures, remember you can hit the 6 key. Other things that can be nice if you don't have them turned on is going to be things like anti-aliasing and maybe ambient occlusion if you want a little bit nicer look to things. That's not too important here, and those will potentially cause crashes if your computer's weaker. But we can see our little character set up in here. What we can now do is do a save scene as, and we can go ahead and hit the up arrow and come into the rig file here, and we're going to create 2 subfolders here. We're going to create one called the control rig, and we're going to create another one here called the skin rig. And I'll go ahead and save this into the skin rig, and we'll just go ahead and make this our Junk Buddy joint setup, because that's going to be step 1. Now, if you want to at this stage, you could go ahead and hide the weapons. We'll talk about these in a moment, but I'll just hit Control-H on those, and we'll go ahead and focus on getting the character set up. So first things first, let's go ahead and come into the front view here so we can actually see this guy from the front, and turn on his wireframe so you can kind of check the topology here. And let's go ahead and create our first joint. We'll come under Rigging and Skeleton, and we'll just go ahead and create Joint. And you can click once to place this here. Now, I am operating on the expectation that you do have some basic rigging knowledge at this point. You can check out some of our other tutorials on this channel, but we're going to mostly be looking at process here and introducing new and specific tools as we go. But if you do need a little bit more information, check out some of our other videos on rigging and, get yourself up to speed before jumping into a full character. So once we get this guy set up, let's go ahead and come up here to shading and X-ray joints, and we're going to go ahead and place these. Now, the first one that I generally place is going to be around here, and it's going to be our root joint or our hip joint. This is going to be where everything basically comes back to, meaning it's going to be the top of our hierarchy. Now, notice I try to place it here on a vertice. The way that joints work is they deform vertices, so whenever possible, we generally want to place these on a vertice, so that way they have a main area that they're going to control. So I'll just go ahead and snap to vertex there to kind of get that into place. Now, from here, we can go to the next most logical area, which is going to be the leg. I'm going to hit Control-D to duplicate this, and we can just hit V to snap if we want to, or we can kind of just approximately place it here. And what you're going to want to do with a character is you're going to want to find kind of the central volume and place it within there. Now, this goes from each view, so I'll go ahead and turn on my X-ray joints here. You're going to want to look at it from the side, from the front, from the back, and really kind of find that central volume if you possibly can. And usually I turn on the wireframe to kind of see it. Now, with the leg in particular, we generally want to try and go with a planar setup, meaning going straight down. So what I might do is move the hip over a little bit. It doesn't necessarily need to be right on the geometry. In terms of the vertices, it is nice if it is, but what I might do is align it here a little bit more with the knee. And I might even go as far as to say, hey, let's place the knee first, which is going to be right about here, since this guy actually has central geometry, and just duplicate this guy up to represent the hip. And I'll put it on the line. With the knee, we can go ahead and duplicate this down to the ankle, and you'll want to check this from the side view. So this will be right about where the ankle is, and you'll see all of these I'm going to just move back a little bit to place on the line there. And that's going to give us kind of our base leg. Now, I like to do a little bit of a cheat with the knee, where I bring it forward a little bit. And what that does is it just makes the IK function easier. This is technically a cheat, and like I mentioned, it's how I like to do it. A lot of riggers don't like to do this, and they set things up a little bit more properly than I do, but I'm not going to worry about it. All right, so that's going to be basically our connections for the legs, but what we need to do now is think about the foot. So the foot's going to have basically one central control, which is going to be the ball of the foot. That's going to kind of lift the toe, and we would also have a toe control potentially. Let me think if we're going to have that here. I think we'd have ball and then toe, so we'll go ahead and hit Control-D here. For the ball of the foot, I'll place it here, and a lot of the times I actually like to place it at the base of the rig, since that's where this kind of pivots from, not kind of the inside. This just kind of guarantees it's going to be on the bottom. And then when it comes to the toes, it's a little bit more complicated. This guy doesn't really have a toe going, but we could get that set. And I could set this higher, I think about it. Sometimes it's good to have it from the central volume, because it does deform from below. So we could maybe have this running through the center and then set this to be the toe. But that's going to be pretty much the setup for the leg. Now, what we want to do is just kind of parent these back and probably name them as we go. You want to be specific with left and right in terms of the setup here. So this is going to be my L_toe_joints. And it looks like my L didn't take for whatever reason, so let's go ahead and input that in again. And that's going to be the child of this guy, so remember it's child parent P, so I'll hit the child, hit P, and this is going to be my L foot ball joint. Could also just say ball joint, football sounds funny. Then we're going to parent up here, this is going to be our L ankle joint. Then we'll go ahead and parent this to the knee. This will be our L knee joint. And remember to add joint to the end. It's a bit annoying, but there are people in the industry who appreciate that. This one will be our L hip joint. The reason why joint's important to add, by the way, is because we're going to have an L hip control, an L hip, offset group, all that kind of stuff. So it can be important to kind of bring these in. So something like that should get us set up. Now, that's going to give me one leg. What I'm going to do now is kind of work my way up here. I'm going to talk about the torso. The torso is kind of interesting because it breaks into 3 regions. You have the thorax, which is your chest area. This is generally your rib cage. So if we're thinking about a traditional skeleton, this is your lovely rib cage here. And what's important to understand about the thorax is it's a series of fused vertebrae, meaning that it moves basically as a box. Then the next area you have is going to be called your lumbar region. And your lumbar region is important because this is actually the one that bends and twists. So this is the way we sit forward, we lean back, we tilt sideways. That's going to be the lumbar region. And then underneath that, you're going to have the pelvis. And the pelvis, once again, is fused vertebrae. So what you end up with is kind of this chunky system where this moves as a block, this moves as a block, but this has a bit more flexibility. Now, the amount of joints you use in your spine is going to depend on what your ultimate goal is. With a character that's kind of stout like this, there's a good chance we're just going to represent the lumbar as a joint, the thorax as a joint, and the pelvis as a joint. So we'll end up with 3 total. But with a taller or longer character, what you might end up with is a few more in the lumbar region. But generally, the thorax and the pelvis are constrained to a singular one. So let's go ahead and work our way up for that. We'll go ahead and just hit Control D. And we can add kind of a central one here, which is going to be the lumbar region. And then I'm going to hit Control D again here, and I'll add another one here, which is going to be the thorax. Now, you can name these accordingly if you want. Generally, they're just referred to as spine 1, 2, and 3. This one, however, is going to be called our root joint, not our hip joint, but our root joint. And that's because everything's going to parent back to it. Then I'll go ahead and just make this our spine 1 joint, and we'll make this our spine 2 joint. Or we can make this our chest joint. In this case, I might even just call it our spine joint if we're only going to have a single joint here. And like I mentioned, this character is intentionally basic for you guys to kind of begin with and not be overwhelmed. Now let's just check that from the side view, make sure it's running down the central volume. And I think that's good enough. I'm not going to worry about getting it perfectly on that center line. I think having it align here with the hips will be a little bit nicer. Coming up from here, we're going to create a neck joint. So we can go to the base of the neck here where we think that's going to move. The neck doesn't really need a lot of fancy stuff going on with it. It depends on the length of your character's neck. Once again, the neck is a bunch of flexible vertebrae. You end up with kind of the top area of your rib cage here, and then your neck is going to be several vertebrae going up, which means it does have a bit of flexibility, but generally we don't need more than just one at the base. So this will be our neck joint. And then we'll duplicate once more for the base of the head, and this will be our head joint. And remember, these are where things pivot from, so we want to make sure these are, in the correct location. Now, for whatever reason, when I was doing my snapping, I got these kind of out of line here. So let me go ahead and bring these back here to the center. That way they're in a row. It's going to be a lot easier to work with them if they're in a row. And I'll just place this here for the base of the head, and we'll go ahead and just name this our head joints. And this character is nice and straight, so we can just kind of have that go straight down. Now, from here, we just want to basically parent these back down to the root. So it's going to be head to neck, neck to chest, chest to spine, spine to root, and then we're all set. Now, one thing I might want to do is, save one of these for the arm system, but let's go ahead and just duplicate off the neck joint here and hit Shift-P. And now we can go ahead and talk about the arm system. Now, the arm system is kind of interesting because it has a floating joint called the clavicle. And the clavicle is interesting because it is used for reach. So if a character from the top is reaching forward, their arm doesn't just come forward like this. This would be the shoulder rotating. Their whole body kind of bends like this, and that clavicle is there to kind of let you get that extra reach. So it's pretty important. The other thing the clavicle really helps with is going to be things like shoulder shrugs. So if you think of this shape for the shoulder joint needs to go up, and the clavicle here kind of acts as a lever for that. Now, I'm noticing I didn't really give this character a whole lot of geometry to justify a clavicle. So the clavicle might mostly end up being a pivot on this character, since it's such lightweight on this geometry. But we could place a clavicle right around here. And we might make some adjustments because similar to the leg, it's really good if we have a planar setup to the arm here. So I might actually work backwards on the arm here, where I actually start with the wrist. And, kind of go from here, or maybe even use the elbow, because the elbow is one of the most important ones just in terms of placement here. Let me see. I think I might go with that as kind of my base measurement here. So let's go ahead and kind of use this as our base. I'll go ahead and make this my clavicle here, and your clavicle is kind of near your spine. This is where it's roughly located, and it acts as kind of like a lever, a pivot location. What I can then do is duplicate this, and I actually might want that to be a little bit further out. Technically, this is the closest geometry, but remember, it's kind of a pivot. That's what this serves. So we'll duplicate this out, and this will be my shoulder. The shoulder is generally going to fall right on the line of the arm in terms of topology that transitions from torso to arm. So it's going to basically control these three areas. I can then duplicate this out again to get to the elbow, duplicate this out again to get out here to the wrist. And like I mentioned, it seems a little bit odd having this a bit lower, but we're generally going to want to make sure that this stays in line. Now, similar to what I did with the leg, there's a little bit of a cheat we can do here with the elbow. If we come in and turn on our X-ray joints, we can just move the elbow back a little bit. We still want it to be in a straight line with all these guys, but when we set up an IK, this is going to naturally give it the bend. And like I mentioned, you can kind of manually add in the bends, but I'm a little bit lazy and like it to be automatic. So we'll go ahead and rename these. This is going to be my left wrist joint, and this one will be my left elbow joint. This one here is going to be my left shoulder joint, and then this one here is going to be my left clavicle joint. And we'll see if that guy behaves. Sometimes the clavicle be a little bit weird and requires some movement. Now, before I parent these up, I am going to duplicate off this last one here just so I have another joint to start building with. But let's go ahead and parent these back together. It's going to be wrist to elbow, elbow to shoulder, shoulder to clavicle. And that will go ahead and create our joints. Now, notice I haven't tied these back into the body yet. That's intentional because it's going to be easier to orient these with them being disconnected. So just kind of be mindful. We will be bringing everything back together, but I'm not for a particular reason. Now let's go ahead and move out to the hand. As far as the hand goes, generally speaking, we can go straight off of the wrist here. If you want to do what I just did, it can be kind of nice. You can turn off your textures here. You could also turn on this icon, which will basically overwrite your textures with a default material. So you'll see you can either turn those off or use this default, whichever one you prefer, if the textures feel like they're a bit hard to see through, and we can go ahead and set this up. Now, as far as the hand goes, this is where things get kind of funny. We really don't need a whole lot going on in this area. What we can do is we can actually jump straight to the fingers. Now, the way the fingers are going to work is we're going to have a base joint, then we're going to have our knuckle joints, and it's going to be per knuckle. So if you look at your finger, there's a base, there's a knuckle, and there's a knuckle. So basically, we're going to end up with like 3 of these guys. So let's go ahead and start out with that on this index finger. I'm actually going to use V to snap to vertex to get it into place. and then just kind of take a look at from the side. I can even use V to snap to vertex if I want it to be in the center. And what I'm going to look for is kind of the patterns in the topology. You can see there's this indent here and this indent here. That indicates where the knuckles are located for this hand. So I can go ahead and duplicate this forward, Control D, make sure it's on that line, and then do the same over here. And these don't have to be planar at all, so don't worry about them being perfectly planar. And as a matter of fact, there's a good chance they're actually going to sit at a bit of an angle here with how the hand is set up. But the main thing is to make sure they're kind of in that central volume. Now we can do the same thing over here, and I designed this to be kind of a mitt hand so we would do less work, because you guys can understand one finger, you can do 5, right? So let's duplicate this here and just kind of place this towards the center volume at the base here. That way it kind of bends in the middle. And just like we did before, you can see that indication of where this indent is. We're going to duplicate these forward to align with that. So I'll just go ahead and Control D and kind of move them forward and running down the central volume. And do the same thing here until we have something that represents this mitt. And I'm just going to use a singular control for this. If you wanted to, you could probably do one above and one below for more shaping. But just to keep this rig as simple and lightweight as possible, I'm going to take that approach here. One thing I might do is just make this a little bit lower, so that way this has a bit of a natural curve to it. But there we go. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and get our thumb over here. Our thumb's a little bit different. The thumb, you're going to have kind of a base where this kind of revolves and rotates from. But what makes the thumb unique is it basically is just a 2-joint system. So there's that first area that bends, and then there's the knuckle. And that's pretty much all we need here. We could probably add in more potentially, but we're going to go with the MVP on this one and just kind of aim for that. It's a little bit tricky to find where the thumb should bend from on this. My modeling was kind of loose here, but I think right about there works. And what we can do is we can go ahead and parent these back here to the next one in line. And we can go ahead and get our joint chains formed. Now, you want to check for any oddities. I have a kind of a weird bend going on with this one, so I might want to take a look at this from the top view and just kind of move these over a little bit. So that way we get a nice angle. And then kind of connect these up. All right, cool. So why have I not connected these? I think we have everything we need, thankfully. So what we can do is we can talk about why I haven't connected these. The reason I haven't connected these is because we need to do their orientations. And one of the things that we have learned from other sessions with orientations is they like to point towards the next thing in the hierarchy when you orient. And sometimes we don't want that. So for example, we want this hip joint to point down this chain. We don't want it to point, over here at this. And likewise, we want this to kind of point down the chain. We don't want it to point at one of the legs randomly because we're going to have another leg over here. And the same goes with the clavicle for the arm, the fingers for the hand, etc. There's one other thing I do like to do, which is I do like to add an end joint for orientation. And this is just kind of a nice to have. It's not really necessary, but what I'll do is I'll create a junk joint at the end and just parent it back to each of these. And you'll see I'm kind of going way outside, but this tells it where to aim. So for on the fingers example, what I'll do is I'll snap this to the outer vertice and then parent that back. And what it will do is it will guarantee this last joint is looking at, the very tip end of that vertice. These we are going to delete. So I want to emphasize we are deleting these. This is a technique I often demo and regret because most of the time students don't delete these. So be a good student, delete these when you're done orienting, and understand their only purpose is to make your job a little bit easier as a rigger. And that it's a little bit of a cheat. Right? Because that last one, for whatever reason, Maya just makes it do whatever it wants. So if we do want to kind of hook these all together just to make sure they're working, we can go ahead and parent the clavicle to the thorax. So that's going to be the chest. And just make sure, it's working. We could parent the fingers to the wrist to make sure we don't need anything else and the pivots look good. And I'm doing this before orienting for 2 reasons. One, like I mentioned, is you can come in here and you can test this to see how it's working. But the other reason is because when I orient these, I want to turn on their display, and it's a lot easier to do if that's a hierarchy. Now, you'll see that the root will be the base. What you can do is you can come in here, you can do a select hierarchy, and then you can do a display transform to say display local rotation axes. So you can see these. Now, that's the reason why I parented this back together. I'm going to go through these and hit Shift-P now to unparent them for orientation, but you can see that made it so I didn't have to select each individual hierarchy. Saves us maybe a few seconds, but not really a whole lot. All right, cool. Now we can go ahead and orient these bad boys. Now, as far as my orientation goes, I like to do down YZ. That goes ahead and kind of maps us to Maya. In theory, the torso is probably already good to go because this is going in a straight line in the world. We can go ahead and test that just to kind of see if I select this base here and we come in here to our rigging and we come in here to our skeleton and orient joints and hit the option box. You'll see the options we can do is switch these things here. The primary axis I like to set is Y. That makes Y point down. And Z, YZ will switch it to be world. So if we go ahead and hit apply, we'll see that. And what you should see is nothing happen on the body. And the reason why is the orientation I like to use, the YZ orientation, matches Maya's world. So this will be good to go. The trick is we need to do that to things like the arm and things like the hand. Now, one thing I did forget on the arm here is to duplicate this joint and create a dummy joint. So I'm just going to duplicate this and then parent this back. So that's aiming towards the hand. But we can come to the base here, and this one will look a lot different. When we go to do our orient joint here and hit apply, we'll see that Y shifts down. Now, you want to make sure that this is consistent, so we should see Z up, X forward, and then Y down on all of these, and it looks like it worked correctly. So what that will do is it'll make it so Y becomes our roll, X becomes our side to side, and Z becomes our forward backwards. And that's the same situation with these. You'll see that, I guess technically on the spine, if we wanted to, we could shift that so that Z becomes the side to side, but I'll leave it there for now. But that's going to be what we get with this. So like I mentioned, the cool thing, Z forward backwards, X up and down matches Maya. Now we'll just go ahead and proceed to do this on the fingers as well. Hit apply, and they should visually look the same as this. So you'll see X forward, Z up, Y forward. And if they do, you're good to go. Now you'll notice this one does not look the same, so we're going to have to do some experimenting with that just to kind of check. And this one here does look correct. So why does this guy not look correct? Maybe kind of the initial rotations, I'm not sure. But what we want to check is that when we grab these together and we use their same axes, they rotate the same way. And you'll see that's not happening here. Now, I don't know why sometimes Maya does that. What we can do is we can go ahead and orient again and see if that works. We can also adjust the orient here to flip-flop, potentially. So since down Z didn't work, we could switch down X here and hit apply. And that one didn't work either. So in this particular instance, I might actually have to manually rotate this, which is kind of interesting. It's not something I was anticipating having to do, but every now and then Maya throws you for a loop. Now, as far as fixing this, you can actually just rotate these joints. It's not ideal to do it as a chain because we took the time to kind of place these. So I'll want to unparent these. And I've actually never had it do a whole chain like this. It's making me wonder why it's having such difficulties. I'm also noticing that this one's not quite on the line and that one is. I can just kind of nudge these to fit this better. But with this one, let's go ahead and unparent these. So I'm going to unparent each of these. And what we can do is we can rotate them to be the correct way and then freeze their transforms. So in this particular instance, I want to make sure Z is pointing up. So I'll just rotate this till Z is up. And then once we have this up, we can go ahead and do a modify freeze transforms. And what that will do is it will go ahead and change the orientation of this joint. And then we can proceed to do this with each of these. So I'll just find the axes I need to rotate on. That first one was 75, so I'm going to assume each of these will be about a 75 rotation to get into place. And you'll want to take your time with this. Getting these right is very important, especially on the fingers. This one here needs a little bit more than 75. I'd normally go through some different views here and make sure that these views are working, but I'm kind of in a hurry. So I'm going to go with what I see here. So we can go ahead and test this now, and you can see now that X is rotating them correctly, Z is rotating correctly, Y is rotating correctly. And we actually want to do this across a hierarchy. So I'm going to select these. We're going to do a select hierarchy and just make sure that it bends correctly. In X, they're all going the same way. Z, all going the same way. Y, all revolving the same way. And that's a successful result. So we can go ahead and delete those end caps. Now, the thumb's a little bit different here. The thumb doesn't necessarily need to move with the same setup here. It looks like it does, which is fine. And I don't really have any complaints there. So the thumb's kind of its own independent thing, but that will go ahead and get this set up here. Now I can go and parent these back into the arm because this system's good. These are oriented correctly and they're working. But you can see how having that finger separated out was kind of nice because instead of having to kind of rework the whole chain and having a whole bunch of errors, we just had that isolated incident where we had to correct those. Another thing is the orient tool's not perfect. So let's go ahead and hit it with the leg here. There's one thing I like to do with the leg particularly is I do like to unparent the ball from the leg here. I find that I don't like an angle on this for rotations. I like it to be straight. So I'm going to hit apply and it won't be perfectly straight, but I can come to the side view here. And what I can do is I can rotate this downwards and freeze its transforms so that it is pointing down straight. And this is just something I find is nice to have a nice flat rotation when you have the FK. But that should be good. You know, all of those look correct. Let's go ahead and orient this before we connect them. All right. That looks good as well. The one thing I might be wary of is the way Z is pointing, but let's go ahead and parent that back just to kind of see. One of the big things that we want to see with the leg is when we grab all these joints and bend in and out, they bend in the correct direction. So they should all bend inward and fold the leg that way. They should all bend outward. And I could also work that into the base here if I wanted to, like the ball of the foot. Now, the ball of the foot ultimately isn't that important because we're going to have a reverse foot controlling this more than likely. But we can check the axes here, and this is giving me the Y, this is giving me a Z, and it looks like the Z and the X are acting a bit weird down here. So that means I very likely have to flip-flop these because this one has X forward and Z out. We can play around with these, so let me go ahead and just see. It looks like that did the trick, setting my secondary world axes to X. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what these tools do on the top of my head. I just know that these little toggles switch the directions things point, and that's kind of good enough for me. So you'll see now all of these are rotating correctly in Z, together as a unified form, rotating correctly in X, rotating correctly in Y. At this point, we can consider that orientation done. We can go ahead and delete that. We can bring this back in here to the body. We can bring the clavicle back in here to the chest. And we're almost done. So at this stage, all we need to do is we need to mirror these over. So mirroring is going to have a couple steps to it, but we're going to need to mirror the arm. We're going to need to mirror the leg. So when it comes to mirroring, a very important thing to be aware of is you want to get your orientation first. The reason why is when you mirror, it does the inverse orientation, meaning that when I rotate this arm forward, it will also rotate this arm forward. But if I didn't have the correct orientation, or if I had matching orientation, what would happen is I rotate this one forward, that one rotates back. It acts like a helicopter. So we want to make sure these are set. From there, what we do is we just select the joint that is the root of whatever we want to mirror. Not the root that it connects to, but the root, the first one of that branch. And if you come up here to skeleton, mirror joints, you can just click this and it will mirror across. But you might notice, hey, what axes did we mirror across? So let's go ahead and delete that and come into the settings here. When you come to the mirror joint setting here, you need to switch to the YZ axes. Now, this is kind of confusing. Why are we switching to the YZ? Aren't we mirroring across to X? This is where I don't always quite understand math and all that stuff. Basically, the axes that this is mirroring across is whichever one's not listed, which is weird. So when you select YZ, what it's mirroring across is it's mirroring across the X-axis. Now, why does it say mirror across YZ? Well, the reason why is if we hit apply, what you'll notice is that our Z is pointing down here, right? So what this is dealing with is going to be the mirrored aspect of the orientation. And that's why it doesn't just say mirror across X, because we're technically not mirroring across X. What we're doing is we're mirroring across X and then we're flipping it upside down. So if your mirror is successful, what you should be able to do is basically select all of your little arm joints on this side and then shift select all of your arm joints on this side. And when you rotate them, they should come together. And this is how you can tell you have a successful mirroring. And this is a really cool thing that's going to just be automatically programmed into our controls because the orientation is going to be there. And remember, we're going to store that orientation for our controls. Now we can do the same thing with the leg. We can just hit apply. The leg will have a similar setup where they go away from each other, they twist in towards each other, but the remaining axes here is the same. Okay, and that gets our joint set up. Delete any remaining joints you don't need. I don't need this head joint. And if you're tired of looking at the orientations, you can do a select hierarchy on these. So let's go to our select hierarchy, display, transform display, local rotation axes. And let's go ahead and do some saving. So I'm going to first off save this here into this folder. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save scene as, and I'm just going to name this my joints and save. Now, the cool thing is with this as a reference, I can just unload this reference and we'll be able to use this exact same joint file when we go to build the control rig. All right, but that should do for the first step, getting our joint set up and our orientation in place. Now, we may need to fix some of this orientation. We may need to fix some of this joint setup. The next stage we're going to get into is going to be our skin bind and our weight painting. Now, before we get into that, let's just go ahead and get a skin bind on here, check how things are going, and then we'll get specifically into weight painting this guy. Now, if you're new to character rigging, when we do a skin bind, what that is essentially going to do is it's going to allow these joints we created here to act as an internal skeleton and move the character. So that's going to be what is going to be happening here, is the joints are going to be able to move the actual mesh. Now, I want to talk about what they are moving, though, because what they're moving is important to understand. They are moving the vertices, the vertex. When it comes to 3D data, I've probably mentioned this before in previous videos, but there really is no other data besides the vertice. Edges, faces, those are just ways of interpreting how vertexes connect. But in terms of what Maya moves mathematically, it is going to be these vertices. Now, we can bind our skin by selecting our root control here, shift selecting our character here, coming up here to skin and bind skin. But you don't want to come into this right away. You want to hit this menu here and you want to make sure these are set up. Now, there's going to be some different methods and some different systems that we use for skinning and binding. The bind method doesn't matter too much here. You'll see closest distance, closest in hierarchy, heat map, geodesic voxel. Generally speaking, geodesic voxel kind of gives us the best out of the box look. None of these matter because ultimately we're going to go to customize in terms of the weight painting. These, however, sometimes can be good out of the system, especially if you have a high density mesh. So for example, geodesic voxel, this works really well if you have a ton of vertices. If I'm working with something that's like a tessellated Dynamesh type system, often I'll use geodesic voxel to create an animation with it and it will work. But it's usually the best. Now, the next one's going to be the skinning method, and this is a little bit more important because this is actually going to control how the object is going to bend, twist, and deform. And the one we want to use for characters is going to be dual quaternion. If you guys need to understand either of these more, go check out our video on binding skin weights. That goes through this more in depth. I'm going to keep this lightweight so we can keep things moving forward. Once you have geodesic voxel and dual quaternion set, you can click apply and just go ahead and bind these up. Now, what this will do is it will make it so our skeleton now actually moves the character. But you might notice right out the gate, there are some wonky issues like the eye is not working and the whole head is being moved by the arm. That's going to be where manually weight painting comes in, and we're going to take a look at that next in another video. But take some time to just make sure your pivots feel okay, your orientations look correct, and maybe take some time to even pose out the character just to make sure that you're happy with these pivots. There's no issues, and you'll be okay moving forward with them in the end. Just make sure as you're doing this, you return these to their initial pose. If you do anything crazy, you can return to bind pose, which is kind of nice. So I'll go ahead and, maybe play around with the hand here. I could even go as far as to just kind of find a pose for this character. So maybe we'll go ahead and just kind of give him a bit of a relaxed pose here. Maybe we'll try bending his spine a little bit, just his leg. Maybe see how the ball of the foot is doing and the knee and all these relationships in terms of the ankle. Is the ankle placed good? Looks like it's okay. Ball of the foot, probably justified, toe justified. So I think all of these, are serving a purpose. I think their pivot's good. And, it looks like we're going to make this character move, which is pretty cool. Now, if you've done all this craziness, you can click on the object here, go to skin, and go to bind pose to return this back to where it began. And we're ready to start the weight painting process. So before you move forward, what I want you guys to do is make sure that these joints are solid, they're in the correct place, they have the right orientation before you get into the binding of the skin. What we'll get into next is going to be the weight painting process, but this will hopefully give you a good start here and a good foundation to move forward and join me in the next video.